Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in the Scoria 7 auction hall tasted of rust, recycled oxygen, and desperation. Kalen felt it coat his tongue, a familiar film he had learned to ignore but never forget. He stood near the back, arms crossed over the chest of his worn pressure suit underlay, a ghost among vultures. The hall was a cavern carved from the moon's bedrock, its walls weeping streaks of metallic or that shimmered under the harsh, flickering lumen strips. Figures in the crowd were hunched and predatory, their faces half hidden by shadows and rebreather masks, all of them there to pick at the bones of corporate failures and private misfortunes. Kalen was no different. He was a hauler, a scavenger of the outer belts, and his ship, the Vagrant, was thirsty for fuel and in desperate need of a new NAV coupler. He was here for parts, for anything he could strip and sell or bolt onto his own aging vessel. It was a life lived on the margins, a constant calculation of risk versus credit, and it had ground the optimism out of him years ago. His past was a different country, one he had been exiled from by war and circumstance. Now, there was only the cold arithmetic of survival. The auctioneer, a corpulent man whose voice was amplified to a grating boom by throat mics, moved through the lots with practiced efficiency. A pallet of deactivated mining drones, a consignment of nutrient paste nearing its expiration date, a confiscated ore scanner, still bearing the scorch marks of the firefight that had liberated it from its previous owner. Kalen watched with a professional detachment, his eyes scanning, assessing, dismissing. Nothing yet. Nothing worth the last of his meager credits. Then the bay doors at the back of the stage groaned open, grinding on rust and neglect. A low, guttural growl echoed through the hall, a sound that vibrated in Kalen's bones and silenced the murmuring crowd. Two handlers in corporate shock armor dragged a heavy Durasteel cage onto the stage, its wheels screaming in protest. Inside, a creature of nightmare and legend lay curled on the grated floor. Lot 734, the auctioneer bellowed, a greedy smile spreading across his face. A prime specimen, decommissioned but far from deactivated. A Fenrir-class bioweapon, direct from the Forlag Corporation's infamous Cerberus kennels. The creature lifted its head. It was canine in form, but larger than any wolf of old Earth, its frame a terrifying fusion of sinew, bone, and machine. Patches of its dark, brindle fur were missing, revealing scarred flesh and the dull gleam of subdermal plating. One of its forelegs was twisted at an unnatural angle, braced with a crude, sparking medical clamp. A heavy, electromagnetically locked muzzle covered its jaw, and thick, energy-dampening shackles bound its limbs to the cage floor. Its eyes, however, were what held Kalen captive. They were not the wild, frenzied eyes of a beast. They were a deep, intelligent amber, and they burned with a cold, weary fire of profound pain. It was a female. He could tell by the finer lines of its skull and the way it carried its broken body with a defiant grace. The crowd shifted, a mixture of fear and avarice rippling through them. A Fenrir. They were corporate legends, whispered about in hushed tones in deep space bars. Alpha predators engineered for pacification campaigns and asset denial. They were living weapons, psychically linked into a pack that could tear through a platoon of armored soldiers in minutes. To see one here, broken and chained, was like seeing a fallen god. Wounded during a compliance action on Cygnus X-1, the auctioneer continued, his voice dripping with salesman's charm. Her neural link to the pack has been severed, making her a standalone asset. Untamable, they said. Too damaged to reintegrate, they said. But for the discerning collector, a peerless guard dog. Or, for the scientifically inclined, a treasure trove of proprietary Forlag biotechnology. Someone in the front row laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. A guard dog that'll eat you in your sleep. The auctioneer shrugged. Control is the buyer's concern. We merely provide the opportunity. The opening bid is 500 credits. The number was an insult. A functioning Fenrir was priceless. A broken one was a death sentence waiting to happen. Silence stretched. Kalen watched the creature. It ignored the auctioneer, its amber eyes scanning the crowd, not with aggression, but with a kind of resigned contempt. It saw them for what they were. Vultures. And Kalen felt a sudden, sharp pang of something he hadn't felt in a decade. Shame. He was one of them. Come now, the auctioneer prodded. 500 credits for a piece of military-grade hardware this sophisticated? The scrap value of its implants alone is worth twice that. A hand went up. 500. The creature's gaze settled on Kalen. It was a fleeting connection, a momentary flicker of shared understanding in a universe that offered none. He saw the proud warrior trapped within the broken shell. He saw the exhaustion of a soldier who had fought too many wars for masters who cared nothing for her. He saw himself. Someone from the side shouted, 600. A low growl rumbled from the cage, a promise of violence held barely in check by the muzzle and the pain. A man near the front, emboldened by drink or stupidity, picked up a discarded power cell from the floor and hurled it at the cage. It clanged loudly against the bars near the creature's head. It didn't flinch, but its eyes narrowed, the amber light within them hardening into something ancient and cold. And in that moment, something inside Kalen snapped. The years of calculated survival, of turning a blind eye, of just getting by, they all fell away. It was not a thought. It was an impulse, a rebellion against the casual cruelty of this place, against the system that created and then discarded such a magnificent thing. It was an act of pure, unadulterated madness. 2,000 credits, Kalen said. His voice was steady, cutting through the murmurs. Every head in the hall turned to look at him. The auctioneer's eyes widened in surprise, then lit with greed. 2,000 was more than Kalen could afford. It was fuel, food, and repairs for 6 months. It was everything he had, and then some. 2,000, the auctioneer boomed. A man who sees the true value. Do I hear 2,100? Silence. The man who had thrown the power cell scowled, but stayed quiet. The others just stared, judging Kalen for a fool. He met their gazes without expression, his hand resting almost unconsciously on the grip of the sidearm holstered at his hip. Going once, the auctioneer sang. Going twice. He slammed his sonic gavel onto the podium, the crack echoing through the cavernous hall. Sold. To the hauler in the back. Lot 734 is yours, sir. We trust you have a strong leash. The purchase was a singularity, an event horizon from which there was no return. As Kalen transferred the credits from his datapad, a cold dread washed over him, the full weight of his impulsive act settling in his gut. He had just bought a broken monster he could not feed, could not control, and could not afford. The auctioneer's men uncoupled the cage and rolled it towards him, their movements hasty, eager to be rid of the liability. He had no plan. All he had was the cage, the beast inside it, and the sudden, terrifying attention of everyone in the room. As he signed the final transfer receipt, a chime sounded at the main entrance. Not the polite chime of a new customer, but the harsh, insistent bleat of a security override. The heavy blast doors slammed shut, plunging the hall into momentary darkness before the red emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in a bloody glow. Corporate security, a synthesized voice blared from the hall's speakers. This facility is under lockdown. All transactions are suspended. Remain where you are. Panic erupted. The vultures, so predatory a moment ago, became a frantic flock of pigeons. Kalen felt his blood run cold. He knew, with absolute certainty, who they were here for. A Fenrir wasn't just decommissioned scrap. It was a corporate secret, and he had just painted a target on his back by claiming it. Through the reinforced plasteel window of the main door, he saw them. A squad of soldiers in the stark white and black armor of the Forlag Corporation's enforcers. They moved with chilling precision, forming a cordon around the entrance. Leading them was a man whose armor was trimmed with officer's crimson. Commander Jorik. Kalen recognized him from wanted broadcasts and corporate news feeds. Jorik was Forlag's chief hunter, a man with a reputation for merciless efficiency. Kalen's military instincts, dormant for years, roared back to life. He drew his pistol, a reliable if outdated kinetic slug thrower. Opened the rear cargo bay. He snapped at the nearest auction house worker, a nervous man sweating profusely. The man stammered, "Corporate orders R2." Kalen leveled the pistol at his head. "Open it. Now." The worker fumbled with a control panel, and a massive service door behind the stage began to grind open, revealing the dust-choked service tunnels of the moon base. That was his only way out. He turned to the cage. The female Fenrir was on her feet, her powerful body tense despite the broken leg. Her amber eyes were fixed on the enforcers outside, a low, dangerous growl vibrating in her chest. She knew them. "Let's go," Kalen said, more to himself than to the creature. He kicked the magnetic lock on the cage's wheels, sending it rolling towards the open bay. The enforcers began cutting through the main door with a plasma torch, the screech of melting metal filling the air. There was no time. He guided the heavy cage into the dark tunnel, the auction hall devolving into chaos behind him. He didn't have the key for the shackles or the muzzle. He had to get her out of the cage first. He ran alongside it, his boots kicking up clouds of red dust. He fumbled with the cage's main latch, a simple mechanical lock he could override. "This is going to be either very smart or very stupid," he muttered, finally forcing the lock. The cage door swung open. The Fenrir didn't move. She stood inside, watching him, her head tilted. It was a moment of pure, terrifying trust. She could kill him in a second. He was offering her freedom, but he was also a stranger, one of the species that had broken her. "Come on," he urged, his voice low. "They're not my friends either." He backed away slowly, giving her space. Behind them, the sounds of shouting and weapon fire erupted from the auction hall. Jorik's men were inside. With a fluid movement that belied her injuries, she stepped out of the cage. She was magnificent and terrifying. She stood taller than him, a silent mountain of muscle and controlled fury. She looked down the tunnel, then back at him. A squad of enforcers appeared at the tunnel entrance, their rifle-mounted lights cutting through the gloom. "There they are. Subdue the asset. Terminate the thief." White bolts of plasma fire seared the air, impacting the wall where Kalen had been standing a second before. He dove behind the discarded cage, returning fire with his pistol, the kinetic slugs punching uselessly against their advanced armor. He was outgunned, exposed. This was it. A stupid, pointless end over a creature he didn't even know. He risked a glance over his cover. 3 of them were advancing, firing methodically. He was pinned. Then, a dark shape blurred past him. The Fenrir. She moved with a speed that should have been impossible for her size and injuries. She didn't make a sound. She was a shadow, a whisper of death. She hit the first enforcer like a freight train, her mass and power sending him flying into the tunnel wall with a sickening crunch of armor and bone. The other 2 faltered, their aim wavering in shock. It was the opening Kalen needed. He rose, firing 2 precise shots at the unarmored neck joint of the nearest soldier, who dropped without a sound. The Fenrir, ignoring the plasma bolts that sizzled against her subdermal plating, closed the distance to the 3rd enforcer. She couldn't use her muzzled jaw, so she used her body. She slammed into him, knocking his rifle aside, and one of her massive, unshackled paws pinned him to the floor. She looked back at Kalen, a clear question in her eyes. "Go," Kalen shouted, gesturing down the dark tunnel. "Move." She seemed to understand. She gave the pinned soldier a final, contemptuous shove and then bounded away into the darkness, her gait uneven due to her injury, but still impossibly fast. Kalen scrambled after her, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were fugitives now, a man who had forgotten how to fight for anything and a weapon that had never been given a choice. They plunged deeper into the forgotten underbelly of Scoria, 7, the shouts of their pursuers fading behind them. The alliance was sealed not with words, but with the shared flash of plasma fire and the silent promise of mutual survival. The tunnels beneath Scoria, 7 were a labyrinth of rust and decay, a forgotten circulatory system for a mining operation that was slowly dying. The air was thin and choked with or dust that clung to Kalen's throat and grated in his lungs. The only light came from his headlamp, its narrow beam cutting a nervous path through the oppressive darkness. He could hear her ahead of him, the soft, rhythmic scrape of her claws on the metal floor and the faint, labored sound of her breathing. They ran for what felt like hours, taking random turns, descending deeper into the moon's crust. Kalen's military training provided a basic sense of direction, enough to keep them moving away from the populated sectors. The Fenrir seemed to navigate by some other sense, occasionally pausing to sniff the air or tilt her head, as if listening to something far beyond his own hearing. He learned to trust her instincts. When she turned, he followed without question. Finally, she led him into a vast, cavernous space that had once been a primary or processing chamber. Derelict machinery, silent and coated in a thick blanket of red dust, stood like sleeping iron giants. A catwalk, precarious and corroded, ran along one wall, leading to a sealed maintenance hatch 30 meters up. It was defensible. It was a place to rest. The Fenrir collapsed onto the dusty floor, her injured legs splayed awkwardly. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, and the pain was clearly setting in. A low whine escaped the confines of her muzzle. Kalen approached cautiously. He had seen what she could do. He had no illusions about the power she possessed, but he also saw the vulnerability. "All right," he said softly, setting down his small pack. "Let's see what we can do about that." He pulled out a compact medkit, its contents meager but functional. He also had a plasma cutter, a tool of his trade. He looked at the heavy muzzle, then at her intelligent eyes. This was the next test. He would have to remove it, and in doing so, he would be placing his life entirely in her hands. He held up the cutter, letting her see it. "I have to get this off you. And those shackles. Understand?" She washed his hands, then met his gaze. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. The gesture was so human, so intelligent, that it startled him. He took a deep breath and knelt in front of her. The sheer size of her head was intimidating. Her teeth, even hidden by the muzzle, could surely snap his arm in two. He worked carefully, setting the plasma cutter to its lowest, most precise setting. The air filled with the smell of ozone and hot metal as he began to slice through the lock mechanism on the muzzle. The Fenrir remained perfectly still, her warm breath ghosting against his hands. Her trust was a heavy weight, a responsibility he hadn't asked for but now felt compelled to honor. The lock finally gave way with a soft click. He pulled the heavy steel contraption away from her head. For the first time, he saw her face fully. It was noble and severe, like something carved from granite, but scarred and weary. She opened her mouth, stretching her jaw, and a long, sighing breath escaped her. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't growl. She simply looked at him, and he felt a wave of what he could only describe as gratitude. Next were the shackles and the crude medical clamp. The energy shackles were harder, their internal power sources making the cutting process dangerous. But he managed, freeing her limbs one by one. The medical clamp on her leg was a brutal piece of work, pinching the flesh and likely doing more harm than good. When he finally removed it, she whimpered in pain, the sound a deep, sorrowful vibration in her chest. The wound beneath was ugly, a deep puncture, inflamed and weeping, with fractured bone visible beneath the torn muscle. It was a plasma wound, cauterized at the edges but festering within. Jorik's handiwork, he guessed. He cleaned it as best he could with antiseptic from his kit, his touch gentle. He applied a regenerative gel and wrapped it in synthetic bandages. It was a temporary fix, but it was better than nothing. As he worked, a strange thing began to happen. Images, faint and fleeting, bloomed at the edges of his consciousness. Not memories, but feelings. A flash of searing heat. The feeling of falling. The cold, sterile white of a laboratory. The warmth of other bodies pressed close in a shared den. He shook his head, blaming the dust and the exhaustion. But then she nudged his hand with her nose, and a single, clear image flooded his mind. A vast, green field under a yellow sun. Other Fenrir, sleek and whole, running free. A sense of belonging, of joy, so pure and powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was a memory. Her memory. It was a world she had lost. He stared at her, his hands frozen on her bandaged leg. "You can do that," he whispered. She blinked slowly. The connection faded, leaving him back in the cold, dusty cavern. He wasn't going crazy. It was real. The whispered rumors about the Fenrir Pack's psychic link were true. She couldn't speak, but she could show him. He finished his work in silence, his mind reeling. This changed everything. She was not just an animal, not just a weapon. She was a thinking, feeling being, trapped in a form designed for violence. He felt a profound sense of injustice on her behalf. They rested for a time, a silent truce between them. Kalen ate a dry nutrient bar, and he offered a piece to her. She sniffed it, then gently took it from his hand with her large teeth, her touch surprisingly delicate. They were a strange pair, the jaded man who had given up on the universe and the broken creature who had never been given a chance by it. Later, as he was cleaning his pistol, she limped over to him and lay down, resting her head on his lap. The weight was immense, warm and solid. He froze, every muscle tense. But there was no threat in the gesture, only a deep, weary need for comfort. Hesitantly, he placed a hand on her head, his fingers stroking the coarse fur between her ears. As his fingers brushed against a patch of scarred tissue near her temple, another wave of images washed over him, stronger this time. He saw a man in a white coat, his face kind. The man was speaking, his voice a soft murmur. He was making promises. A promise of guardianship, of a purpose beyond destruction. Then the image shifted. The kind man was gone. Administrator Forlag stood in his place, his face a mask of cold ambition. The training began. Pain, fear, the neural overrides that forced compliance, a screaming agony in the mind. He saw the Cygnus X, one campaign not as a compliance action, but as a massacre. The Fenrir pack, driven by the overrides, being forced to attack civilians. He felt her horror, her self-loathing, her desperate struggle against the commands she could not disobey. He saw the moment of her injury. Jorik, standing over her, his plasma rifle smoking, a cruel smirk on his face as he severed her connection to the pack, casting her out. The vision ended, leaving Kalen breathless, his heart pounding with a phantom terror that was not his own. He understood now. Forlag hadn't just created weapons. He had perverted a species, turning noble guardians into slaves of war. Lyra, the name just came to him, a whisper in the back of his mind. Her name was not a monster. She was a prisoner, and her pack was still enslaved. He looked down at the magnificent creature resting her head on his knee. He saw the deep, puckered scar on her flank from Jorik's rifle. Almost without thinking, he pulled up the sleeve of his underlay, revealing the jagged, silvery scar tissue on his own forearm, a souvenir from a corporate war on a different forgotten moon. A reminder of the day he had followed orders he knew were wrong. She lifted her head and nudged the scar with her nose. For a moment, he felt an echo of her own pain mingle with his, a shared understanding of trauma that transcended species. In that silent exchange, in that dusty, forgotten chamber deep in the earth, his personal quest for survival died. A new purpose began to take root in its place. It was no longer about escaping. It was about justice. The days that followed blurred into a routine of survival and evasion. They moved through the wastes of Scoria 7, a landscape of abandoned strip mines and canyons carved by corrosive winds. Kalen's skills as a scavenger kept them alive. He raided derelict outposts for power cells and water filters. Lyra, in turn, became his guardian. Her senses were preternaturally sharp. She could detect the distant thrum of a corporate patrol vehicle long before he could, guiding them into hiding in the labyrinthine cave systems. Their bond deepened in the silence of the wasteland. Communication became a seamless flow of gesture and shared thought. He learned the nuances of her mental voice, the warm pulse of contentment when he found fresh water, the sharp spike of alarm at a perceived threat, the deep, melancholic ache of her loneliness for her pack. He learned her story in fragmented visions, the simulated hunts in the training grounds, the comfort of the pack mind, a single, unified consciousness that Forlag had shattered and corrupted. One evening, as they sheltered from a dust storm in the husk of a giant mining crawler, Lyra showed him the pack. She closed her eyes, and Kalen's mind was pulled into her senses. He saw through her packmate's eyes. He saw the red haze of the neural override, the constant, agonizing command to hunt and destroy. He saw them being deployed by Jorik, turned loose on a small, independent settlement at the edge of the corporate zone. He felt their confusion and their pain as their bodies moved against their will, their claws and teeth tearing into defenses, their howls not of fury, but of anguish. Forlag was using them, framing them. He was manufacturing a Fenrir uprising to justify a brutal crackdown on the moon's independent colonists, and, more importantly, to declare his own bioweapons too dangerous to be audited by the Intercorporate Council. He was covering his tracks and consolidating his power in one move, and Lyra's pack were the pawns, forced to become the monsters everyone believed them to be. Kalen pulled back from the vision, gasping, a cold sweat on his brow. The sheer cruelty of it was staggering. It was a war they could not possibly win. He had a pistol and his wits. Forlag had a private army and a pack of psychically controlled apex predators. Direct confrontation was suicide. He felt a familiar, bitter despair begin to settle over him. What could one man and one wounded wolf do against a machine like that? Lyra seemed to sense his hopelessness. She nudged his hand, then projected a new set of images, not memories this time, but schematics. A complex web of energy, a network. At its center was a pulsating sphere of light. It was the chorus conductor, the central hub that broadcast Forlag's control signals to the pack. It was located in the heart of Forlag's command citadel on Scoria 7, the most heavily fortified structure on the moon. Then came the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The conductor was a symbiotic system. It required a consciousness to regulate it, to act as the alpha of the network. Forlag used a brutal, unsophisticated AI that hammered the pack with commands of pure aggression. But the system was designed for a more nuanced, organic interface. It could be pacified. It could be freed. But the price was absolute. To override Forlag's control, a living mind would have to integrate directly with the conductor's core. That mind would become the new alpha signal, a constant, silent broadcast of peace and calm that would soothe the pack and permanently sever Forlag's connection. But in the process, the individual's consciousness, their memories, their personality, their very self, would be dissolved, overwritten, and subsumed into the machine. They would cease to be a person and become a presence, a guardian signal, an eternal, silent warden. It wasn't death. It was erasure. Kalen stared into the swirling dust outside the crawler's viewport, the impossible choice settling upon him like a shroud. This was the solution. The only solution. A sacrifice not of the body, but of the soul. For 2 days, he wrestled with the revelation. He was a survivor. His entire life since the war had been about staying alive, staying invisible, staying free. He had fought and scraped and bled for his own small, meaningless existence. To give it up, to willingly walk into oblivion, was contrary to every instinct he had honed. He thought of his life before, the faces of the men he had lost in the war, the hollow feeling of coming home to nothing, the long, lonely years spent hauling scrap between uncaring worlds. What was he really clinging to? A collection of painful memories and the grim prospect of more of the same. His was a life of taking up space, of consuming resources, of moving on. He had no legacy, no connections, nothing that would leave a mark on the universe. He looked at Lyra. She lay nearby, watching him, her amber eyes filled with a sad wisdom. She knew what she was asking. She was offering him a choice she and her kind had never had. She represented something pure that had been twisted and corrupted by the same kind of cynical, power-hungry system he had once served. In her, he saw a chance for redemption, a chance for his life, and its end, to have meaning, to build something instead of just surviving amidst the wreckage. On the third morning, the dust storm broke. The twin suns of the system cast long, sharp shadows across the red desert. Kalen had made his decision. The conflict within him had ceased. A strange sense of calm, of purpose, settled over him. He sat cross-legged on the floor of the crawler and began to field strip his pistol. It was a ritual, a habit from his old life that cleared his mind. He cleaned each component with practiced efficiency, the metallic clicks and scrapes the only sounds in the silence. Lyra watched him, her head resting on her paws. When he was done, he reassembled the weapon and set it aside. He would need it to get to the conductor, but it was no longer the focus of his plan. It was just a tool. He met Lyra's gaze, and without a conscious thought, he opened his mind to her, projecting not an image, but his intent. A simple, clear feeling of acceptance, of resolve. I will do it. A wave of profound sorrow washed back over him from her, so strong it felt like a physical blow. It was not a protest, but a lament, a mourning for the man she had come to know. She rose, limped towards him, and pressed her massive head against his chest. He could feel the deep, slow beat of her heart. He wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her coarse fur. For a long moment, they stayed like that, two solitary beings in the vast emptiness of the wasteland, acknowledging the price of the peace they were about to fight for. Then, she pulled back and looked towards the distant, jagged silhouette of the corporate citadel on the horizon. The sorrow in her mind was replaced by a cold, hard determination. It was time. Their infiltration of the citadel was a ghostly ballet of precision and violence. Lyra's knowledge of the facility's layout, gleaned from her time there, was flawless. She led him through unmonitored maintenance conduits and forgotten sewer systems, bypassing the outer layers of security with an ease that spoke of a deep familiarity with her prison. They moved like specters through the citadel's metallic guts. The final approach to the command spire, however, could not be done with stealth alone. They emerged into a primary transit corridor, and the alarms blared instantly. Enforcers swarmed from every direction, their armor gleaming under the sterile lights. What followed was not a battle, but a storm. Kalen moved with the lethal grace of a soldier reawakened, his pistol shots precise and economical, targeting vulnerabilities in the enforcer's armor. But he was only a diversion. The true force was Lyra. Freed from her muzzle, she was a whirlwind of controlled destruction. She moved through the enemy ranks not with the mindless rage Forlag had programmed into her pack, but with the focused fury of a creature fighting for her family's soul. She was not a beast. She was a warrior. They fought their way up, level by level, a desperate ascent towards the spire's peak. Kalen took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around and searing his flesh. He gritted his teeth against the pain, staying on his feet, firing back. He was bleeding, slowing, but his resolve did not waver. Finally, they reached the command deck, the blast doors hissing open to reveal the bridge. And waiting for them, standing before the shimmering entrance to the conductor chamber, was Commander Jorik. He held a heavy plasma rifle, a cruel smile on his face. Behind him, Administrator Forlag watched from a raised command throne, his expression one of annoyed curiosity, as if observing a pest infestation. The broken toy and its new master, Jorik sneered. I should have killed you both back at the auction. It would have been cleaner. You should have, Kalen said, his voice a low rasp. He raised his pistol. Jorik was fast, but Kalen was faster. Before the commander could bring his rifle to bear, Kalen fired. The slug hit Jorik in the wrist, causing him to drop the heavy weapon. Jorik roared in pain and drew a vibro knife, lunging forward. Kalen met his charge, the two men crashing together in a brutal, close-quarters fight. Lyra moved to intervene, but a shimmering energy barrier flared to life around Forlag's throne, cutting her off. The animal will watch, Forlag said, his voice calm and detached. This is a matter of employee discipline. Kalen and Jorik struggled, a desperate dance of survival. Jorik was stronger, fueled by fanaticism, but Kalen was smarter, more experienced. He used Jorik's momentum against him, twisting, blocking, looking for an opening. The commander's knife sliced his side, and white-hot pain flared through him. He stumbled back, his vision swimming. Jorik raised the knife for a final, killing blow. In that split second, Kalen saw not Jorik's face, but the faces of all the corporate enforcers he had fought, all the petty tyrants he had served or fled from. He saw the universe of casual cruelty that had created them both, and he was filled with a final, defiant rage. He lunged forward, under the arc of the knife, and drove the butt of his pistol up into Jorik's jaw. The commander's head snapped back with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the deck, motionless. Kalen swayed, pressing a hand to the bleeding wound in his side. He was fading fast. He looked at the sealed door to the conductor chamber. It was so close. Impressive, Forlag said from his throne, a flicker of genuine surprise in his voice. But pointless, he tapped a control on his armrest. A noble effort, but ultimately, you have failed. The doors to the chamber remained sealed. Kalen's heart sank. It was over. He had failed. But then, behind him, there was a sound of immense impact. Lyra, with a roar of pure, focused rage, had hurled herself against the energy shield protecting Forlag. The shield flared violently. She slammed into it again. And again, cracks of golden energy spiderwebbed across its surface. With a final, desperate heave, she shattered it. Forlag stared, his composure finally breaking as the massive creature, bleeding from a dozen minor cuts from the shield's collapse, advanced on him. He fumbled for a weapon that wasn't there. Lyra pinned him to his chair, one massive paw on his chest, her teeth bared an inch from his face. She did not kill him. She held him, her amber eyes burning with cold judgment. She looked from the terrified administrator to Kalen, then nodded towards the conductor chamber. Go. Kalen staggered to the door's control panel. His fingers, slick with his own blood, found the manual override. The doors hissed open, revealing a chamber filled with a soft, pulsating light. In the center was the chorus conductor, a sphere of woven light and crystal, humming with immense power. He stumbled inside, the door closing behind him. This was the end of the line. The pain in his shoulder and side was a distant fire. His life was bleeding out onto the pristine white floor. He looked at his reflection in the crystalline spires of the machine. He saw the face of a tired, broken man who had finally found something worth breaking for. He thought of Lyra. He thought of the pack, tormented and enslaved. He thought of the green fields under a yellow sun. He reached out and placed his hands on the central crystal. The world dissolved. It was not a flash of light or a clap of thunder. It was a silent, peaceful unraveling. His memories, his pain, his name, they were all threads being gently pulled from the tapestry of his being. He felt his consciousness expand, flowing out from his body into the light of the machine. He was no longer Kalen. He was a signal. He was a thought. He was a single, unwavering note of peace broadcast across the void. He felt the tormented minds of the pack. He touched them, not with a command, but with a soothing presence. He quieted their pain. He broke their chains. He told them they were free. Across the scarred plains of Scoria, 7, the hunt stopped. The Fenrir, poised to descend on another settlement, froze in their tracks. The murderous red light in their eyes flickered and died, replaced by a soft, amber glow. They lifted their heads, listening to a new song in their minds, a song of sanctuary and release. They turned as one, a silent, disciplined army, and melted back into the wastelands, their rampage over. On the bridge of the citadel, every console monitoring the pack flashed the same message. Alpha protocol overwritten. Connection severed. Forlag stared in horror, a prisoner of the very creature he had tortured, forced to watch his empire crumble in a single, silent moment. The war was over. 10 years passed. The Forlag Corporation, crippled by the scandal of the Fenrir program and the subsequent inter-corporate sanctions, collapsed into bankruptcy. Scoria, 7, its resources exhausted and its name synonymous with corporate atrocity, was abandoned. The company stripped its assets and left the moon to its ghosts and its corrosive winds. But the moon was not empty. Over time, the red dust settled. Hardy, native vegetation began to reclaim the stripped mines and the abandoned settlements. The air, no longer choked with industrial pollutants, slowly cleared. Scoria, 7 became a sanctuary, a wilderness preserve protected by a strange and potent legend. They were called the Guardians of Scoria, or sometimes the Silent Pack. The Fenrir, once feared as monsters, now roamed the planet freely. They were rarely seen, but their presence was felt. Prospectors who landed illegally would find their equipment disabled, their ships gently nudged back into orbit by an unseen force. Lost travelers would find a path mysteriously cleared for them, or a fresh water source they had overlooked. The pack, led by a large, scarred female with wise amber eyes, kept the peace. They were not weapons. They were shepherds of their broken world. On a high mesa overlooking the great Rust Sea, a simple monument stood against the twin suns. It was a cairn of red stones, rough and unassuming. Stuck into the top of the cairn was an old, battered kinetic pistol, its metal pitted and worn by a decade of wind and dust. It was a grave for a man who had no body, a memorial to a ghost. An old man stood before the monument, his face weathered by time and space. It was Silas, the former dockmaster who had once, long ago, reluctantly sold Kalen a faulty NAV coupler. He had been deposed during the corporate collapse and had made a new life here, as the moon's unofficial caretaker. He came to this place once a year. As he stood in silent contemplation, a shadow fell over him. He turned. Lyra stood there, silent as the dust. She was older now, her fur streaked with gray, but her eyes were as bright and intelligent as ever. She was not alone. The rest of the pack, dozens of them, sat patiently at a distance, a silent, watching council of amber-eyed giants. Lyra approached the cairn. She did not look at Silas. Her gaze was fixed on the old pistol. She lowered her great head, and rested her muzzle against the weapon's stock. She stood like that for a long time, her eyes closed. There was no psychic projection, no grand display. It was a simple, quiet act of communion. A soldier paying respect to a fallen comrade. A friend remembering a friend. Finally, she lifted her head and looked at Silas. In her eyes, he saw not a beast, but a queen. He saw a deep, abiding peace, and a sorrow that would never fade. An understanding passed between them, a shared knowledge of the price that had been paid for this quiet world. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, of shared guardianship. Then, with a grace that defied her size, she turned and padded away, rejoining her pack. Together, they vanished back into the red haze of the wasteland, silent protectors in the world their savior had bequeathed to them. Silas remained, watching the empty horizon, alone with the memory of the hauler who had bought a monster and, in doing so, had saved a world. The sacrifice was not forgotten. The peace endured,